Hello and welcome to Crucible of Words for more dedicated legacy action. Today we are looking at March of the Machine for a little bit of bonus content for you and a small set review. We're going to talk about the 10 cards that I think are most likely to see legacy play from the new set, as well as a little discussion of the set in general. So first up, I don't think this set is going to have a massive impact on legacy, certainly not as much as previous sets have. The reason for this is twofold. Firstly, this set is incredibly legend heavy. And the problem with being legend heavy for legacy is that legends are not so great right now, because Caracas means that the quality a legend has to be is very high. So it either has to be quite cheap or it needs to do something when it comes in. So Caracas kind of invalidates a lot of the cards in this set. Sort of like 3 to 5 mana legends that require staying around and play for a turn or two to do something just aren't particularly viable in legacy. And many of the legends in this set are quite expensive because they got this whole thing of having 2 legends sort of stapled together in one card, and the convert mana cost of them is a little bit high. So I don't think a lot of those cards are going to make it to legacy, which is a lot of the sort of weird splash effects are sort of a bit too high up the curve, and also are legends. So it's going to be a little bit tricky to get some of these through. So I don't think we're going to see that many cards from that portion of the set. Now the other thing the set has is battles. So these are cards that you play them and they have an effect and go into play under the opponent's control. And you can attack them down or remove the counters, and then you get another effect when it flips. The problem with a lot of these is that seems like a lot of resources to me to dedicate to flipping over a thing that's not necessarily on a legacy power level. A couple of the battles have reasonable effects when they come into play, but they're worse versions of things that already exist. And whether or not you're going to want to dedicate a load of resources to flipping it over doesn't really make sense to me. I don't think it's going to be a thing we're going to see a lot of in legacy, if at all. Which is fine, you know, not everything is going to be for legacy, and if you buy less cards, you can buy more cards from reserve list from saving up your money, right? But I don't really think battles are going to make much of an impact. I haven't sort of extensively thought about all of them, but when I was going over it, just didn't seem like that's where legacy is going to be drawing from. So that sort of reduces the pool of cards that are viable in legacy, in my opinion. So let's start and look at my top 10 picks for cards that are going to see play in legacy. First up, we have Bloodfeather Phoenix. We've seen Phoenixes before as a thing that, you know, you can get a little bit of value with and do some stuff with. There is a Grixis Phoenix deck that occasionally pops up in Legacy that uses Buried Alive to put Phoenix in your graveyard, and then you bring them all back. That's the Arclight Phoenix, which attacks for 3. This one obviously doesn't attack for 3, and it's got a cost to bring back. So is this good enough? I'm pretty on the fence, but I think in a shell with Dragon's Race Channeler and a couple of Phoenixes, like these ones and the Arclight Phoenixes, you might be able to get a little bit of joy out of them. Now, that does make you quite susceptible to graveyard hate. But in a world where Delver has kind of taken a bit of a beating, maybe sort of going a weird route for Delver, like less Delver, more Channeler value type thing, might be worth doing. I don't know. But this could see a little bit of play. I'm not necessarily convinced this is good enough, but I was kind of struggling to find 10 picks a little bit, and this is the one that ended up taking the 10th slot. All right, let's go to our number 9 pick. Omnath, Locus of All. So there's a couple of reasons why I think this card will see play, and they might not be the ones that you think. So first up, it's the mana cost. That's why I think this is going to be relatively playable, because this pitches to all of the pitchcast elementals and is an elemental itself, which might be relevant. So you can play like an elemental deck possibly with Cavernous Souls, but also you can make a 4 mana 4/4, and if it sticks around for a turn, then you get stuff. Obviously, is it going to stick around for a turn? Probably not. And if it does, whatever creature you played for 4 mana that sticks around is going to be good anyway. But I think the ability to pitch cast this for all the elementals is useful. We've seen like scam decks playing Queen Marchesa and a few other sort of like 4 mana guys that aren't necessarily that great because they have different colors and can pitch. So, you know, it pitches to every pitch cast spell in the game pretty much. So maybe this is good enough. Again, I was struggling a little bit to find a full 10 that I thought were really good for Legacy, so we ended up with an Omnath. But I think this will see a little bit of play as a pitch thing, and people will try it out. People are playing the other Omnath, but that obviously cantrips when it comes into play, so it is just better than this for the most part. But people might want more sort of copies of things they can pitch. All right, let's go to number 8. Halo Forager. So this is a 3 mana 3/1 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, you may pay X. When you do, cast target instant or sorcery card with mana value X from a graveyard without paying its mana cost, and then exile it. So this can get cards out of your opponent's graveyard, which is quite an important one on occasion. It means that if your graveyard's getting hated on, you can at least still get a little bit of value from it. Now, we're looking at paying 4-ish mana for like this plus a Brainstorm. Now, a 3/1 flyer for 3 is an okay-ish rate in Legacy. Like, Brazen Borrower exists. Sometimes you cast it just as a 3/1 flyer. This is that with a little bit of extra text. Now, the fact that you can cast the suspend spells, things like Ancestral Vision or the Crashing Footfalls, stuff like that, the fact that this can cast them, just pay 3 mana and then just pay X 0 to play it, means that maybe it's got a little bit more life in it than you would initially think. And I think that might be something people will try. Once upon a time, there was a deck that was built around Shardless Agent cascading into Card Advantage. So it would basically cascade into Hymn to Turak, Cantrips, Tarmogoyf, and Ancestral Visions. So you can have maybe a similar sort of plan with something like this, and especially when we live in a world of loads of cards going into graveyards from things like Dragon's Rage Channeler, it might be relatively easy to stick one of those in there and then get yourselves a couple of rhinos, or draw yourself 3 cards or whatever. That certainly seems like something that might be fringe playable, and I think people will try it. Next up, we have Sword of Once and Future. So this is the last of the sword cycle. So this is the protection from blue and black, which is reasonable colours to be protected from. Lots of people playing Snuff Owl, lots of people playing Brazen Borrower, things like that. Murktide Regent is a big creature that usually stonewalls a lot of decks. This allows you to push through that. And the +2/+2 usually means the creature you're sticking on will also dodge red removal, provided they don't blow up in response to you equipping it. And the actual hit on it is pretty useful. So you get to Surveil 2, and then get a free spell from your bin that costs 2 or less, which is pretty good value, I would say. Now, that's kind of all it does. It's the Surveil is 1 bit, and then it's the get a card from your graveyard. So it's not like Sword of Fire and Ice where you get to draw a card and kill a thing, but this gets you a little bit of extra value because you're not paying the mana for it. So I think this is fringe playable, and I think because Stoneforge Mystic is a good card, this might be appearing in a few people's Stoneforge packages, and then they'll see how it lies in the metagame. Next up, we have Guardian of Ghirapur. This is a 3-mana, 3/3 angel that when it comes into the battlefield, you exile 1 target artifact or creature you control, and then it comes back at the beginning of the next end step. So this is kind of like a Flickerwisp that can only hit your own stuff, but it's a 3/3. It's a 2 and a white, which is a really important mana cost considering there are decks right now that play Ancient Tomb, Petal, Ancient Tomb, Chrome Mox to spam out some guys early. So I think this is probably going to see a little bit of play here and there. Like, blinking effects are strong. This is another thing that can set up a good blink chain with the Yorion blink chain, because you can sort of blink this and then it blinks the Yorion, etc, etc. And it also has the ability to be a little bit easier to cast, which means Esper Vial might be interested in something like this. So that's kind of something that I think is probably going to see a little bit of play in a few deck lists. I don't think it's as good as Flickerwisp, because Flickerwisp can target your opponent's things and get rid of tokens like Marit Lage and stuff like that. But I do think this has some potential. Next up, we have Rampaging Raptor. So this is a 4-mana, 4/4 trample haste guy with a type of fire breathing. When it deals damage to an opponent, it also deals that much damage to target Planeswalker or a battle. I don't think the battle side is going to be relevant, but being able to attack your opponent and their Planeswalker is quite useful if you're an aggressive deck. I think we've seen green decks playing Questing Beast here and there. This is a similar thing. It's got different forms of evasion on it, but it still has evasion. It can be grown if necessary. Is this going to be changing up sort of mono-red stompy archetypes? I don't think so. But is it possible to see this as a thing that might see a tiny bit of play here and there? I think so. I think just being able to hit Planeswalkers and opponents at the same time is just a really useful thing to do right now, especially when these decks can kind of get outvalued quite easily by Planeswalker decks, being able to just keep attacking for the face and dealing with the stuff that they're deploying. Now, one of the big problems with this card is that it costs 4 mana, which means it's competing in the slot with Caves of Chaos Adventure, which is obviously very good against a lot of these sort of controller decks that have Planeswalkers anyway, because they tend to not necessarily have ways of committing to the board to steal the initiative back. But maybe if you want another 4-drop, this is one you can do if you're in mono red. It's possible. I don't think it's going to break the world, but again, like I said, I don't think this set is amazing for Legacy, so we're sort of trying to find the picks where we can find them. Now this is the first one that I think is actually a pretty decent card for the Legacy meta. So this is the 2 mana instant counter target spell with mana value 2 or less. For a lot of decks, this is just a 2 mana counter spell that doesn't require blue, which is pretty good. You would expect to see stuff like that, see a little bit of play here and there. Now the other bit is really interesting to me. So this is counter target red or green spell with mana value 6 or less. So that's basically any red or green spell in Legacy for the most part. Some people are going to be hard casting Atraxa or whatever, but it's going to hit all your top end stuff like Minsk and Boo, and most Green Sun Zeniths are going to get hit by this. You're also going to be able to take out natural orders, stop those from coming in. So it's going to be able to hit a lot of things. All the initiative guys are now like 4 mana, so Caves of Chaos Adventurer, Undermountain Adventure, I think it is. So those sorts of things are going to get cleaned up by this. So I think this could see some play, certainly in metagames where, obviously red and green decks are a bit bigger, because the decks that aren't red or green tend to have smaller mana costs anyway, apart from black decks, which kind of snowball up into the 4 drops like Sheoldred and Helm of Obedience, stuff like that. But a lot of decks, they're pretty low to the ground in Legacy because, it's a high-powered format. People are playing really cheap and effective spells. This can counter a lot of those, and it's easy to cast. So I think this might see a bit of play. Next up, we have Surge of Salvation. This is an uncommon, 1 white. You and permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn and prevent all damage that black and or red sources would deal to creatures you control this turn. So this blanks red sweepers, whether that's going to be things like Pyroclasm or one of the ones that just ping stuff for 1s. That's going to be quite useful for some decks. And just giving you and permanents you control hexproof means that you can save yourself from a wasteland. You can also save multiple permanents in 1 turn if that's a thing that's going to be relevant. This seems like it's one of the best versions of this effect if the protection is what you really, really need. So I would be surprised to not see some of these creeping into a few people's sideboards to try. I've already know some people are talking about playing this in mono white Painter. So I think it's going to be a pretty good one. Now, the one downside with this in decks like Painter is that it doesn't stop Meltdown, because that's just a destroy that doesn't target. So it doesn't do everything, but it does a decent chunk of things. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a few of these in people's sideboards. Now we're getting to the back end. We've got Barrel and Carry Zev. So this is a legend, and I said at the top that legends require a lot to be good. Now this has a lot going for it. So let's just have a little look. So it's 3 mana, and it's a blue card, so it pitches to Force of Will. It's a red card, so it pitches to Fury if that's the thing you want, but not necessarily that relevant. It's First Strike and Menace, so it's probably going to be able to attack okay-ish. But whenever you cast your first instant or sorcery spell each turn, you may cast a spell with lesser mana value that shares a card type with it from your hand without paying its mana cost. If you don't, you get a 2/1 haste guy. So that's quite a lot of stuff you can get there. So if you don't have cards in hand, you can make a monkey with it. Now it is legendary, so you only get 1 at a time, but that's still a reasonable amount of value. Now the reason I like this is you can play this and then immediately fire off a spell. If you've got like a Brainstorm or whatever in the spare mana, you can do that and get a 0-drop. Now what sort of 0-drops could you be playing? Oh yeah, Crashing Footfalls, Ancestral Vision. These sorts of things are things you can cast off of it just from casting a 1-drop, which seems pretty nice to me. But also, we're in a format where Snuff Out and Force of Will and Daze are really big players right now. So you can play a Force of Will and then get a 4-drop for free, like a 4-drop spell. That seems like a lot of value. Or you can Daze and get a free Brainstorm or Ponder or whatever. So that seems like a quite potent way of gaining a little bit of card advantage. And you may have noticed that quite recently, a certain red-blue deck lost one of its card advantage engines. Now, if you're going slightly bigger, this card feels like it probably has some use to you. It probably encourages you to play more sort of like cheaper free spells, a bit like the Mercurial Spell Dancer lists I've seen recently. They're even going as far as running things like Gut Shot. Now, if you're running that with the 0 cost spells that have like Suspend, I think you can get an awful lot of value out of them. So I think this one, people are going to try it for sure. Whether or not it's going to be good enough, I don't know, but I think people are definitely going to try it. And then we're going to the final card that I definitely think we'll see play. Wren's Resolve. Now, this is not a very exciting card. So this is 1 and a red sorcery. Exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. So, this is a functional reprint of a card called Reckless Impulse, which is a 4 of in mono red storm decks and some of the sort of red splash X storm decks. It's also seeing play in Delver decks. So some people have just replaced Expressive Iteration with Reckless Impulse, and I think that's a good shout because it lets you guaranteed to see 2 cards. It's a sorcery, so it's a useful type for your Dragon's Rage Channeler, and quite often you're going to be able to play the cards from it anyway. So that seems like a pretty good card, Reckless Impulse, right now in my opinion, and this is the same thing. Now, why would we want another one? Are people going to want to play 5 to 8 of these? Some decks maybe want more, you know, maybe 5, maybe 6 in total, but Legacy is a format where there are some cards that exist called Cabal Therapy. There's also the 3-mana Cleric who names a card and makes that card cost more. You know, there's these sorts of things. Even things like Meddling Mage sometimes see a little bit of fringe play. So you've got all these things that will punish you for having multiple copies of the same card. Surgical Extraction, another one. Especially if you're on the Storm front, someone might be looking more to surgical out one of your card advantage spells, especially if they know you've got another one in hand. Whereas this way, if you split between 2 Reckless Impulse, 2 Ren's Resolve, you're kind of covered a little bit. So I am 100% convinced that this card is going to see play. I don't think it's going to change anything in the format at all, but I think it's going to see play, which is kind of an anticlimactic way to finish my list of top 10 things I think are going to see play. But that's my honest opinion. I'm not entirely convinced this set is going to be a big one for Legacy players, but these are my guesses and my predictions. And that's about it. So I hope you enjoyed me going over my little look at March of the Machine for Legacy. And if you want to see some Legacy content, my channel is a good place to be. So like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think is going to see play in Legacy. Stick that in the comments. I'll be really interested to see what you've been sort of theory crafting around or even testing with proxies. I'd really like to know. And if you want to become a member of the channel, you get some sweet perks. So that's a thing you can do as well. But just keep an eye on my channel and you can watch some Legacy, right? And see which of these cards come to the surface. All right. Thank you very much for watching and goodbye.